Please feel free to ask questions as we go. It's absolutely fine, but there will be time for questions at the end. So, just to warm us up a little bit, just with the people around you, can you have a look at the different Mr. Men characters that are on the board, please? And decide in your classroom where would you sit them all. So I'll give you 2 minutes. We've got a range. We've got Mr. Quiet, Mr. Noisy, Mr. Forgetful, Mr. Busy. You know who they are in your class, okay? So 2 minutes, think where you would put them, please. So I'm sure we would love our classrooms to be full of Mr. Perfect, Mr. Good, Mr. Cheerful, but sadly that's not the way. And actually the other ones give us lots of entertainment and challenge throughout the day. So anyone got any ideas? Who would you put by who? Who would you put by Mr. Rush? Who are you saying? Who would you put by Mr. Rush? Anyone? Yep. You have a student who's like Mr. Rush, and who do you sit him by? Okay, so there's certain people who actually sometimes in your traditional classroom setup you're thinking, oh, hang on, if I put Mr. Rush by Mr. Daydream, he might give him a little shift to get moving. Yeah, that could be a way to get Mr. Daydream going. But you wouldn't put Mr. Rush next to Mr. Noisy because they might get a little bit carried away with each other throughout the morning, okay? Well, in our school, actually, we don't have set seating, okay? So just to put this into context, DES is a not-for-profit school, and a lot of the money that we have last year went into changing our classroom environments. So up here, it's a bit blurry, sorry. This is a year 1-2 classroom. You can see we've moved all the tables and chairs out at that point for them to do a task on the floor. This room in the middle, it changed last summer, is actually a year 4 classroom, okay? So we've got raised seating, low seating, horseshoe tables, and we've got seats which are just on the floor. It's really flexible, okay? And the one in the corner is our library. That was another big investment which we had because we wanted to engage all children, make them all want to go there. So there's little nooks and crannies you can hide in and read, as well as open spaces, okay? The reason we've done this move is to support our vision for child-led learning. We have to give all children the flexibility to work in the style that they need to. So if you look in the year 4 classroom, there are times when everyone needs to be sitting at the table, but there are also times where perhaps a child is being creative and wants to go and sit in the corner of the room on the floor on their own. And we are setting up an environment where that is absolutely fine. It's encouraged, okay? It was a big shift. We took our time to get there. You know, we didn't just go and buy loads of furniture overnight. We spent a whole year looking at the different way our children work, looking at the different spaces we need, okay? So when I'm talking about what we do, just keep that in mind, okay? That is our current environment. So why did we make this change? As well as, you know, we know that 21st century and the way everything's going, we've been doing a lot of research into inclusion versus aspiration. the difference between accessibility and challenge, and differentiation and mastery. At the moment, a lot of research is saying against things such as streaming because it puts a ceiling on people's ability to learn. And actually what we really want to do for children who have additional needs is remove that ceiling but guide them so that they can move up in the same direction as everyone else, okay? So the reason we've done that is because actually every child is unique, and their education should be too. So our child-led curriculum, for quite a while we've been saying we're child-led. This is the first year I will put my hand on my heart and say we are a fully child-led curriculum, okay? So the vision for our curriculum was to design one where children had a greater input into the direction of the curriculum. And the reason we wanted to do that is because we know that if you raise levels of engagement for children, actually what naturally follows on after is that rates of progress improve, so academic standards go up, okay? So a lot of our focus has been on making sure that our curriculum is fully child-led. So what we really want is for children to learn. Now, looking specifically at children who have additional needs, we're thinking about marginal gains, aren't we? So here you've got your wheel. You've got the big picture, what you want a child to achieve throughout their time in school. But actually, you need to be focusing on every single little step. So for some children, it could be that they're in year 6 and actually they're still working on applying their full stops. But to get there, they've got to get the understanding of actually when to pause. And have that understand that it's not just putting a dot somewhere on the page so that they've pleased the teacher and said, I've put full stops in my work. They've got to have that understanding behind it. Each of those little things are marginal gains, which are really important for all children, but especially for children who have inclusion needs. Actually, those marginal gains are what needs to be celebrated. They're those small steps of progress which we have to be sharing with them, with their parents, with other teachers, so that they can see that they are progressing. Over on this side, when I was talking a little bit ago about differentiation and that ceiling, this links to that because low levels of challenge against mid to low levels of skill actually lead to boredom. How many people have worked with children who have additional needs who are bored? Okay? This is why. Because we are putting a cap on what they can achieve by perhaps always putting them with an adult for support who always does the work for them with the best will in the world. They're sitting there for too long with them and they do it for them. That's why you get these different things. Put the challenge too high against their skill level, and it causes anxiety. That's what we don't want. So what we're actually looking for is the middle line going up, where there's a nice flow to their learning. They're not worried, they have control over everything they're achieving, okay? So, there's a bit of the background about what we do, and now here is how we deliver our child-led curriculum. So each year group, they come up with a concept, a big question. An example would be diversity. We've had freedom. This term we've got a year group are doing power, sustainability. It's just one word or a question, that's all it is. They then go into class at the end of the term, ready for the next term with that word. So, for example, the word freedom, I would just go in and say, okay, what do you know about freedom? What does the word freedom mean to you? And you get all that information back from the children. So as well as that, it's telling you what they know already, you're also seeing the levels of engagement, because if a child within freedom, actually someone was talking about the freedom to move from country to country. And actually everyone in the class jumped on that idea and ran with it, because they were all really interested in the way in some countries you have a lot more freedom to move, and others you don't have as much. One class jumped on that, and that's the direction they ran on. Another class looked at freedom because of leadership, and that was the direction they went. So each class ended up going in a different direction because of the child consultation. Okay? From that child consultation, you've got their interests, their drive. That feeds into the planning process. Okay, so their interests feed into the core subject planning, the thematic planning, and then the social studies. As well as it being in the thematic, we also have standalone. Okay, so around National Day time and Ramadan, we do special social studies projects. Throughout that process, the teachers are doing responsive planning. You'll see the planning in a second. It's not pages and pages. It's really not reams and reams. Some plans actually are 2 lines long, because that's all it needs to be at that point. Where I expect to see the detail is in the response. This is what you've expected them to do. Where have those children gone wrong? Where have they excelled? Where are you going to go next? Because actually, for a child who has additional needs, sometimes you think this is exactly what you need to do for them. And then it comes to the lesson and you've either got to take 10 steps backwards or 100 steps forward. You really don't know. So we've removed the writing a whole page for a plan, because actually we felt that the teacher's time is better spent in the reflection after. Okay, so I'll show you an example of that in a bit. So I'll just put on the board an example of 2 different child consultations. The first one was done term 3 last year with a year 3 class, and the topic they had as a starting point was freedom. So I don't know if you can read it, so I'll read some things out. Some people thought that freedom was the ability to do whatever you want. Brilliant. That caused a lot of excitement. Some of them wanted a day where they could do whatever they wanted in school. Others went down the animal route, because we have, as a year group, they're very passionate about animal rights, which is very interesting to see, and they thought they shouldn't be in cages, so that led to a debate. But you can see all of those ideas were coming out of the children. I could not ask any probing questions. You might say, oh, can you expand a bit further? Or what do you think about that? Is that something that interests you? But that's the only part of input that the teacher has at that point, okay? They're just scribbling by the side the direction it's going in. This is another exciting way to do it, to mix it up. This is called a lotus blossom. So you put the word in the middle, so let's say discovery, and you might have, say, 5 or 6 groups who have these, and then they sit there, they put all the words around the outside linked to discovery. Then you pass it on, so you get the next groups. You draw another lotus blossom around the outside. They have to pick one word from the outside and put it in the middle of the next lotus blossom. They fill it in, you pass it on. And then you go round, and then it comes back to you, and then you pull out the things that have interested that group. By doing that, you end up going a lot deeper into the topic. Now, at this point, you've barely heard me mention inclusion. You've barely heard me mention additional needs. That's because this approach gives every child a chance to show the direction they want to go in. It gives every child a chance to be motivated and engaged. Okay, so when you're doing this process, the way you group the children, actually, it's not that important, because Mr. Rush next to Mr. Busy, they're all excited, they're all sharing their ideas, they all want to get them down. So what we've noticed is, yes, we're differentiating in lessons and we're giving children the options of the level of questions they're doing, but we're not needing to differentiate anymore in the way of, you sit over here, you're separate from this person because, it's not going to work, you need the adult support. That's gone, okay? We know we have some children who have one-to-ones, but actually at this point, they don't need it. The children support each other. The children bring each other on, okay? So, just going back to the freedom example, in year 3, these were the directions. We have 5 classes in a year group. They were the different directions that they went in. So we had people linked to freedom, freedom in society, so the rules. Some children thought that rules were really important. Other children thought you didn't need rules and it would be a great place to live. Animals and people linked to freedom, so they did 2 subtopics because they were had a bit of a split. Symbols of freedom and safety and animals, okay? Freedom and safety is not a topic I ever would have considered given to a year 3 class, because actually it doesn't sound that engaging. But for them, that was the direction they wanted. And then on the side, you can see the areas that they covered. So regardless of whether they were doing people linked to freedom or symbols of freedom, they all linked in letters, biographies, debate, newspaper reports, okay? So you can see that you're still covering all the curriculum objectives, not in the way that you would necessarily plan, not linked to the Tudors and the Stuarts or anything like that. It's the direction that they've chosen, okay? So talking about the responsive planning cycle, this is where the level of differentiation comes in. This is where you're really looking at the inclusion of children. So you've got the child-led learning at the top, and you've got your time where you're asking questions, they're exploring the concept, and then you've got to reflect and review. So you're doing this at a personal level, you're doing it with the class, and it's informing your next steps. And then from there, you get the teacher-directed input, where they are going back through what they thought was going to happen that day, and they're completely changing it because they've got to plan the next steps for the child. If you take an area such as time as an area to look at, you finish hours, minutes, everything, and you think, yep, term 2, I'm going to cover it again. I know exactly where those children are. Day 1, you haven't got a clue. Because the ones you think had it have forgotten it, the ones who didn't have it have worked on it at home, and it's a completely different world, that lesson, than where you thought it was going to be. So that's why that reflection and review at the end of each lesson is so key, okay? In the teacher-directed input, we do have questions, for example, in maths, where we are saying, yep, you've got, you need to be doing these questions. But actually, we have trickier, and trickiest questions on the board. That gives the children the freedom to move between the areas. So a child might say, I'm not feeling very confident with this. They start on the tricky questions. 2 questions in, they're absolutely flying. Well, actually, the next questions are on the board, so they can check in, and they can say, yep, I'm ready to move on, and they might move on to the trickier. They could even go as far as the trickiest questions in the lesson. You can also look at it the other way. A child might have loads of confidence in a lesson, and they say, yep, I've got it. I'm going to start with the trickiest questions. And they do one, and actually they realise, I'm not quite there yet, and they take a step back. So that is why, when I'm talking about that glass ceiling, you can see that by always saying you are working on the circle table, you are working with the triangles, you can actually be putting a ceiling, a barrier to children's learning, because they are not having the chance to access anything else, okay? So that's why we approach the curriculum the way we do. So it's all about raising academic standards. I've talked about that already. When I introduced the full child-led curriculum at the end of last term, we did it as a pilot. So actually, when we were doing the pilot, they had to fill out questionnaires every week, look at children's work very carefully, and this was the success criteria we had before we took it on as a full school vision. Our child-led curriculum runs from FS1 to Year 6, okay? So as you can see, if you look at the quality of work is higher for lower ability children. Out of 5, it scored 3.7. That shows to me that actually by changing the approach, the impact it's had on those lower ability children, because they are more engaged, and we're talking over a 6-week window they monitored this. So over 6 weeks, they saw that the lower ability children, there was between a noticeable difference and it being very different in the quality of work they're producing. 6 weeks, that's not long. If you look at how often you're reviewing IEPs and everything like that, think about how much of an impact that is. Managing behaviour is easy. Luckily, as a school, we don't actually have behavioural problems, okay? I know we're very fortunate with that. But still, low-level disruption, 3.4, that's a huge difference. Engagement and motivation levels are higher, 4.6 out of 5 in just 6 weeks. So I hope you can see that even though I'm not standing here giving you ways to support children who have additional needs, but as a school, by changing our whole approach, our whole ethos, it's naturally become more inclusive for these children, okay? I'll just give you an example of the responsive planning before I come back to that. So here is our responsive planning. The bits in the red, I've changed the names. The bits in the red show the way they've actually gone back and reflected after a lesson. So you can see actually there's not that much information in there. It's a few questions to get them going, an idea of how to complete the table. But actually what's mattered is after that lesson they've gone back, they've moved children to different groups, and they've looked at perhaps who they might pair. So Cameron and Ryan made up names, but actually when I swapped them, Cameron was a child who has autism. He feels really confident with maths at times, but other times not so much. But we know that he works very well with this child who's now called Ryan, and they work well together. They can support each other, but sometimes it can have a negative impact. So after this lesson, the teacher realised actually it would do Cameron the world of good to be in Ryan's group next lesson, because it will help build his confidence. It will help him access the curriculum. So that is where our differentiation is taking place. So questions that we got asked at another presentation I did, but also we did this presentation for parents. The main question we got was, how are we ensuring that the children's needs are met? And I hope that responsive planning document shows that to you. Okay? We are actually meeting the children's needs at a much more personalised level, because when we're doing planning scrutinies, planning checks, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the level of differentiation coming in following the lesson before. How are we ensuring coverage? The same way we used to. As you go through, you're checking off the curriculum objectives. We use the National Curriculum 2014, which we have put in a nice table so the teachers can work through it. Because we're following the child's interests, if, for example, that Year 3 class who love animals, if they wanted to do animals again, the teacher's job is to steer them towards another interest, but to make sure they have that equal level of engagement and involvement, and they feel like it was their idea. I can't let a Year 3 class study dolphins Year 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's not going to benefit them, but you can take it as a starting point and then steer it in different directions. How does this approach impact on standards? As you saw from the impact grid, it's gone up. It's particularly gone up for our lower ability and our children with additional needs, but it has gone up for all children. So if you have any questions, you can, I'm just checking time. Yeah, you've got 3 minutes before you have to fill out your questionnaire. You can ask the questions, but if we run out of time because you have to fill out your questionnaire, just email me on the curriculum address that's on the board. Yes. Okay. Yeah. We don't use textbooks. We have the mastery curriculum for maths, which is the White Rose Hub, but we don't use the textbooks. We use the planning ideas to feed into ours. But yeah, as a school, we are textbook free. It's all planning, and we use different websites to help us. So, for example, for humanities, we've got Hamilton to take ideas from. But that's it, yeah, no textbooks. It was a big change for some of them, and lots of the teachers, to be honest, moaned at first because it was a lot of work. But now because they can see the benefit, and actually they're getting a lot more enjoyment from teaching because they're not pulling out the same things they've done for the last 10 years. Because our school, everyone stays for ages. You don't have a high staff turnover. They can't pull out the same thing they've done before. So they actually are getting enjoyment by trying different things. Anyone else? Yeah. I've got them and I'm happy to share them with you. I came up with a list of concepts by kind of Googling a range of words that actually could lead to different directions. But then I sat down with all the teachers and we looked at them, and then they added others. Power, I hadn't put on there, but actually the Year 14 came to me and said, we would like to look at power. And then we said, right, we looked how many different directions could it go in? Oh, actually quite a few. So yeah, that's fine. It just has to be a very open word, like movement. When I looked at movement, I think of people moving, but actually they thought of birds flying between different countries and things like that. Yeah.
Do you do different words and concepts per year group, or so it's per year group?
Yeah.
So do you have like a curriculum map?
So
type
what
thing?
we have is, so last year we did one concept for everyone for one term, just because it meant we could all sit there and reflect and look at the directions we've gone in, and you could see actually how different it could be, one word, across a range of year groups. But now we have a list of concepts, and what they're doing is they mark down what concept they want to do that term. And then it's on there. Once it's gone, it's gone. First come, first serve is our policy, so it makes people be organised. And then that goes on the map for the next year. So the year 4s going into year 5, the year 5 teachers will see, oh, actually they've done power, so they can't have that option. So let's look at another one. Anyone else? Now, apparently you've got the questionnaire to fill out. I don't know the code. I'll have a look on my phone in a second to see if it's working. But apparently it wasn't working a little while ago. So if you've logged in already and filled it out, can you have a go? Otherwise, I'll go just behind and get them to put the code up for you, okay?